যেখানে মায়ের স্মৃতি সেখানে ব্যথার জ্যোতি, যেখানে মায়ের স্মৃতি সেখানে ব্যথার জ্যোতি। আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। যেখানে মায়ের পূজা সেখানে দশভুজা, যেখানে মায়ের পূজা সেখানে দশভুজা। Guja, Anandam, Shudhu Anandam, Anandam, Shudhu Anandam. যেখানে মায়ের কথা সেখানে আসন পাতা, যেখানে মায়ের কথা সেখানে তার আসন পাতা, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। যেখানে মায়ের গীতি সেখানে মায়ের স্মৃতি, যেখানে মায়ের গীতি সেখানে মায়ের স্মৃতি, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। যেখানে মায়ের নাম সেখানে বৈকুণ্ঠ ধাম, যেখানে মায়ের নাম সেখানে বৈকুণ্ঠ ধাম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। ভজরে মায়ের নাম, জপরে মায়ের নাম, ভজরে মায়ের নাম, জপরে মায়ের নাম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। বদনে মায়ের নাম, শ্রবণে মায়ের নাম, বদনে মায়ের নাম, শ্রবণে মায়ের নাম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। গগনে মায়ের নাম, পবনে মায়ের নাম, গগনে মায়ের নাম, পবনে মায়ের নাম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম। জীবনে মায়ের নাম, মরণে মায়ের নাম, জীবনে মায়ের নাম, মরণে মায়ের নাম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু আনন্দম, আনন্দম শুধু कोटि भानुकर दीप्त सिंहमः कटितट कौपीनवान्तम् कोटि भानुकर दीप्त सिंहमः कटितट कौपीनवान्तम् अभिरभिहुङ्कारनादितदिङ्मुख प्रचण्ड ताण्डवनृत्यम् अभिरभिहुङ्कारनादितदिङ्मुख प्रचण्ड ताण्डवनृत्यम् मूर्तमहेश्वर उज्ज्वल भास्कर भीष्टममर नरबन्धम् भुक्तिमुक्ति कृपाकटाक्ष प्रेक्षण मघदल विदलन द्राक्षम् बालचन्द्रधर बिन्दुवन्दमिह नौमि गुरु विवेकानन्द मुक्ति कृपाकटाक्ष प्रेक्षण मघदल विदलन द्राक्षम् बालचन्द्रधर बिन्दुवन्दमिह नौमि गुरु विवेकानन्द मूर्धमहेश्वर उज्ज्वल भास्कर भीष्टममर नरबन्धम् वन्दे वेदतनुमूर्छितगर्हित काञ्चन कामिनि वन्दम् मूर्धमहेश्वर उज्ज्वल भास्कर भीष्टममर नरबन्धम् भीष्टममर नरबन्धम् भीष्टममर नरबन्धम्
We need to formally welcome Swami Brahmananda ji. I can say that he's from St. Louis, and he has been monk for 41 years. And he has come in the past, and last year we had heard him on Zoom. So I think most of you all know him. If you don't, then you can talk to him later, and you get to know him. And he will give a talk for about 45 minutes, Swamiji, or 1 hour.
You just cut me off when you're
No,
bored.
I don't want to cut you off. No way, no way. Yeah. But anyway, after whatever time it takes, after the talk, there'll be questions and answers, and I'm sure he has all the answers. So then he can cut him off himself when he gets tired. Okay, Swami, namaskar. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
My pleasure. So it's nice to be here again. And let me ask, as a sound check, is anyone having a hard time hearing at this point?
Yes, two of them. Can you hear? Can you hear, Swami?
Yeah, this is, now I don't know whether, I don't speak loudly, so I don't know whether it's more important to sit close to me or to sit close to the speaker. I mean the mechanical speaker, I'm the non-mechanical speaker. So,
We have two seniors, they are buddies, they sit together.
So we have the seniors over here and the juniors over here, so it's nicely organized. So, so it's nice to be here again. I used to come here years ago by accident. I was on my way to the northeastern corner of Tennessee to do a weekend or a week-long retreat with the center from Florida, and I'd stop here with Mahayogananda on the way there and on the way back. And
2 times.
how much?
2 times.
I thought it was more.
No, 2 times.
Just 2 times.
Well, could be more, but 2 times definitely.
At least 2 times, if not more. And so then I got to see you quite a bit on those occasions, because we do a couple programs before Tennessee, a couple programs after Tennessee. And then Usha has invited me separately. This might be my 3rd trip,
Yes.
just as a standalone. I must say I like it much better when I've got 2 or 3 other monks with me. It's more fun. And I don't have to work as hard, but
I would add one thing. One time we had 3 Swamis together, Swami A, Swami M, and Swami N.
When was that?
And this was like not the second time when they all came. And they
Something-
all 3 gave different discourses all together.
Wow.
It was wonderful.
And we had the center at
It's
that.
right here, yes, right here.
yeah, that was a lot of fun. So anyway, I'm glad to be here after this 2-year kind of austerity that we've had with the pandemic. And to see, I say, we've got a full-fledged center with 4 Swamis now, and it's been a struggle during the pandemic. We locked the devotees out for a while. No one could even come in the kitchen. They dropped the food off at the back door when we realized it was okay to eat other people's food. Before that, we had to cook for ourselves, and that was terrible. But it's hard to keep things up when you don't have the normal flow. And come here and see how sparkling clean and neat and organized the ashram is inside and out. It made me feel so good.
Very good. Thank
Sri
you.
Ramakrishna loves order, neatness, organization. And when a center is like that, Thakur likes to be here, and he brings his devotees, you see. So I was just thrilled to come here and be here again and see how much love has been lavished on your center during these hard times. So the topic today is Swami Brahmananda as a spiritual teacher. And you're all familiar with Swami Brahmananda, so I'll give only a brief sketch of his life, and then focus on first-hand accounts of his interactions with friends, monastic disciples, and devotees during the mature period of his life, how he prodded, counseled, reprimanded, and otherwise inspired people to set their feet on the path and realize God. He was born Rakalchandra Ghosh in January of 1863 in a village about 36 miles from Calcutta. He lived 60 years, dying in 1922. Rakal, as a child, was handsome and energetic. He was good at sports, gardening, and fishing. His early academic career was excellent. His later academic career was not so sterling. When he focused his mind on something, he always was excellent. But when his mind shifted from the temporary to the eternal, his studies suffered a lot. He was fond of devotional singing. When the village minstrel would sing kirtan, he would listen with rapt attention and learn the songs. As a young boy, he would practice meditation in the Kali temple, and during Durga Puja, he would sit right behind the priest performing the worship and meditate like a yogi without moving. From his childhood, Rakal was quiet by nature and deeply religious. And he had great physical strength. None of the boys in his village could compete with him. And he kept this strength to the end of his life. When he was in his late 50s, Swami Brahmananda was his personal attendant. And something happened, something was misplaced, and Maharaj suddenly became angry. And he pushed this young monk. And he pushed him so hard he went out of the room and into the veranda. And Swami Brahmananda was thinking, I mean, he's his personal attendant, he's with him all the time. I had no idea Maharaj was so strong. On another occasion, it's narrated by Swami Prabhavananda, again later in life when he was the leader of the Ramakrishna Matha mission. Swami Prabhavananda and another young monk were walking with Maharaj in the woods. And I don't remember, I didn't look it up, whether it was a tiger or an angry bull. Was it a bull? It was Ushanos. It was an angry bull. And this bull came and had the notion that he was going to get rid of these people in his path. And as this scene developed, the two young monks on either side of Swami Brahmananda moved forward to protect them. As they were moving forward to protect him, he extended his arms and pushed him out of the way. And pushed him away like a couple of flies, and stood and faced the bull, who changed his mind and went away in another direction. I mean, this is his physical strength and his spiritual power and his fearlessness all in one. These are two young men, and he's an old man, and one arm for each of these young fellows, and then the bull with his spiritual strength. This is something that was also true of Maharaj all his life, Swami Brahmananda. His mind was so integrated that whatever mood he was in was communicated to those people near him, and suddenly everyone else was in the same mood. I'll get to this later. The other thing that I heard from my teacher, Swami Satrakashananda, when he talked about Swami Brahmananda on his birth anniversary lecture, is his father was a wealthy man, and he had a school so that his children could get educated. And the teacher in those days would reprimand students, might hit them on their knuckles with a ruler or something, but it's physical reprimanding. And whenever that would happen, this young boy, Rakal, was so tender-hearted, he'd start crying. He'd start weeping. And it happened every time. And eventually, the school teacher had to quit giving physical reprimands because of this unusual and very compassionate boy. But this also never left him. So this was Rakal as a boy. And meanwhile, in Dakshinaswar, Sri Ramakrishna prayed for a pure-hearted young man with deep love of God who could stay with him and imbibe his teachings. You remember Ramakrishna would say, I want someone with whom I can share my innermost feelings and my spiritual discoveries. And it's like someone that's looking for a ghost when someone dies on Tuesday. Think, oh, there's going to be a ghost, and I'll have a companion. Another ghost has a companion. And every time this would happen, that the ghost, the man or woman who is going to die, recovered. So this is always a failure. So he's praying earnestly to the Divine Mother for a pure-hearted young man with deep love of God who could stay with him and imbibe his teachings. Ramakrishna had a vision just a few days before Rakal's coming. He said he saw the Divine Mother putting a child in his lap and saying, "This is your son." I shuddered at the thought and asked Mother in surprise, "What do you mean? I have a son?" Then she explained with a smile, "This will be your spiritual child, Manasaputra." And I was comforted. Sometime in the middle of 1881, Sri Ramakrishna had another vision. He saw two boys dancing on a full-blown lotus floating on a Ganga. One of the boys was the young Sri Krishna, and the other was the same boy, who the mother had previously placed in his lap. That very day, Rakal, crossing the Ganga, came to Dakshineswar from Konagar. The master immediately recognized him as his spiritual son. Sri Ramakrishna said, Rakal has the keen intelligence of a monarch. He could rule a kingdom if he wished. In the 5 years that they were together, between 1881 and 1886, Sri Ramakrishna trained Rakal. Rakal had many spiritual experiences, including samadhi. After the master's passing, Rakal renounced the world and took monastic vows with his brother disciples and became Swami Brahmananda. Swami Vivekananda called him Raja because of Sri Ramakrishna's assessment of Rakal, and he was later known within the Ramakrishna order as Maharaj, or Great King. From late 1889 to 1895, Swami Brahmananda lived the life of a wandering monk and practiced severe spiritual disciplines. Most of that time he was accompanied by one of his brother disciples at the insistence of Holy Mother and Swami Vivekananda. They worried that if someone wasn't with Swami Brahmananda while he was practicing these severe spiritual disciplines, he would become so absorbed in meditation that he would not beg food. So the brother disciples went with him to make sure that he ate properly and that his body was taken care of. They went to perform spiritual disciplines themselves, but also as his attendant. So much respect and love. While in Omkarnath on the river Narmada, Swami Brahmananda was once during this period in samadhi for 6 days, unbroken samadhi. While he and Swami Shubodhananda were in Vrindavan practicing austerities, one of Sri Ramakrishna's admirers, Vijay Krishna Goswami, questioned him. He said, Rakal, Sri Ramakrishna gave you all that is covetable in spiritual life. He gave you everything, visions and samadhi. Why then do you still practice so much austerity? Why are you acting like a beggar when you have received so much? Swami Brahmananda humbly answered, the experiences and visions that I received through the Master's grace, I am now trying to attain as my permanent possession. And he had a wonderful advantage over the rest of us. Swami Brahmananda knew exactly where he was going because he'd been there already. All he had to do was put in the intense effort to make those exalted experiences his own. In 1895, Swami Brahmananda returned to Calcutta. Swami Vivekananda called all his brother disciples back to Calcutta, to the monastery, because most of them were out practicing spiritual disciplines, and to start the work. I mean, he could see what was forming, and he knew they had to be there. And Swami Brahmananda took his own sweet time. He'd stop somewhere and spend a few months and stop somewhere else. Swami Ashokananda narrates, his 6 years of wandering had been of great spiritual growth. And on his return to Calcutta, everyone was amazed to see his shining face, just beaming with indescribable joy. He had become also very calm and grave. The boyish youth who had gone out traveling in 1889 returned, a mature man, vitally changed, visually changed. He was steadfast, stalwart, enduring, self-reliance, master of innumerable spiritual experiences. He was now well established within himself. And now, with a little more experience, he was qualified to rule both a spiritual and a material kingdom as the leader of the Ramakrishna Math and mission. Swami Vivekananda handed over responsibility of the fledgling Ramakrishna movement, mainly to Swami Brahmananda and Swami Saradananda, before he died. Swami Vivekananda had tremendous faith in Swami Brahmananda's judgment and loyalty. He said, "Others may desert me, but Raja will stand by me to the last." See, this is a very, very important, the dynamic between these two brother disciples. Swami Vivekananda was not an easy leader to follow. He made quick decisions and quick changes. And not all, even his brother disciples who were Ishwarakodis like Swami Pramananda, couldn't follow him sometimes. Swami Pramananda, Swami Abhudananda, Swami Yogananda, they all raised objections to this service of God and man. This is not what the Master taught us. This is not his teachings. You're going off on your own. No matter which way he twisted and turned, he couldn't shake Swami Brahmananda. Swami Brahmananda was on his tail. This is a very American idiom. You know, you're having a race around a track with race cars, you know, like the Indianapolis 500. And you've got one car that's out ahead of everyone else. That was Swami Vivekananda. He was racing around. He'd lap people. And no matter how fast he went, no matter which turn he took, he couldn't shake Swami Brahmananda. Swami Brahmananda was always right there behind him. He had that deep spiritual insight. This is what he's talking about, his judgment. That, you know, when he said, "Serve Jiva, Shiva," that it was coming directly from the Master. He didn't have to be told or cajoled or argued with. He understood. There's another incident that comes to mind. This is after Bellarmont was bought, the land was bought, and the monks were living there. And if I remember correctly, in the first autumn they were there, Swamiji had a vision of Mother Durga walking across the Ganga and realized it's her worship time. And he made this tremendous fuss, as he was wont to do. He says, "We're going to worship Mother Durga this year. I saw her. She was walking across the Ganges. She wants our worship." And he made this big fuss, and of course they had to do it. And later they found out Swami Brahmananda also saw Mother Durga walking across the Ganges. But his temperament was completely different. He didn't say anything, he just saw her. You see? So they're together. You see? They're together. And a third incident occurs to me. Swami Vivekananda was returning to Calcutta by rail after he was world famous. And at Howrah Station, huge crowd was gathered, and his brother monks were there to greet him. And as he alighted, observers reported this. Swami Vivekananda, the world famous Vivekananda, went up to another monk in overrobes and bowed down to him. And people were thinking, what is this? Well, what was happening? Swami Vivekananda made pranams to Swami Brahmananda. And he said, the Guru's son should be respected as the Guru. And when Swami Vivekananda got up, Swami Brahmananda made pranams to him and said, the elder brother should be respected as the father. So this is not the topic, but as a side issue, this is just a wonderful, kind of inscrutable relationship that they had. When Swami Vivekananda suddenly passed away on July 4th of 1902, Swami Brahmananda cried like a child over his body. And as Swami Sardananda lifted him up, Swami Brahmananda said, it is as if the entire Himalayan mountain range has disappeared from before my eyes. So the subject is Swami Brahmananda as a spiritual teacher. I will give a summary of his various qualities as a spiritual teacher that's gleaned from the first sketch of his life, published serially in the Prabhupada magazine in 1930. It's a series of articles, but it's really his first, the first attempt at a biography. So he's known both as Swami Brahmananda and Maharaj, or Raja Maharaj. And I'll use all those terms according to context. And then, as we go along with this summary from the old Prabhupada, I'll come in with specific examples and reminiscences that illustrate the points that are being made about him as a spiritual teacher. So this is from that one of the articles in 1930. Never did Swami Brahmananda pose as a religious preacher or teacher. He did not talk much on spiritual matters, either because he held them too high and sacred, or because his gentle nature shrank from the attitude of a teacher. He never gave a formal discourse on religion. He did speak publicly. I found one time in South India, he was prevailed upon to speak for about 20 minutes, and I would guess that it was in English, and he did a very nice job of it. And I can't imagine him speaking for 20 minutes and not speaking on spiritual matters. So there is at least one exception to that. Whenever he spoke on religion, he did it in a mood of inspiration in the course of ordinary conversation. If a religious question specifically was put to him, he would generally avoid it, humorously pointing to one of his gurubhais or to a learned younger Swami, who happened to be nearby, as the fit person to answer that. That's the right person to answer that important question. At times, with his usual mirthfulness, Swami Brahmananda would introduce a light topic or create some fun, in the course of which he would disclose a spiritual truth or give a hint or suggestion which would solve the doubt of the questioner and not infrequently change his or her outlook on life forever. These were matters of everyday occurrence. To all appearances, he was as merry and playful as a child, and possessed an inexhaustible fund of jokes and stories. But behind that, all that gaiety, there was an undercurrent of spiritual consciousness which nothing could thwart or impede. Many a time it was observed that while merriment was in full swing, and any expression of genuine religious feeling by any that were in his presence would bring about a sudden and complete change. His soft, cheerful countenance would suddenly appear grave and solemn, and a perfect serenity would fill the room. We spoke of this earlier. Maharaja's natural inwardness of mind also exhibited itself in the occasional moods of absorption into which he passed while listening to random conversation or smoking a hookah, as well as in his dignified and sober demeanor. But the ceaseless flow of his spiritual consciousness was all the more apparent in his transcendent aloofness. Though in the body, he was not of the body. He loved all, he mixed with all. He had interest in everything, yet soared far and beyond. He viewed things neither in the grossness of their limited reality as name and form, nor in the homogeneity of pure consciousness and existence. With each name and form, he realized the infinity that stood behind it. Thus, though living apart as a spectator, he had an ineffable love and sympathy for all. He's describing Vivekananda. This is what the author is describing, fuller knowledge, as it. As people who knew Swami Brahmananda experienced it. You have nirvikalpa samadhi and you come back and you see that divine essence in and through everything. This is what he's trying to describe. This witness-like attitude was so remarkable a feature of Swami Brahmananda's personality that it would not escape even casual notice. Yet in spite of his wanted reserve, if anyone had real trouble or difficulty in spiritual life, Maharaj was ever able and ready to help. To many he gave private instructions, but only after he had been convinced of their sincerity and earnestness. In his own words, many people request me to bless them. I can't help laughing within myself when I hear them. In fact, they don't do as I ask them to. In fact, the moment they leave my presence, they do whatever they like. They want to attain the highest spiritual realization without the necessary exertion. Don't you see? When such people come, I usually while away the time aimlessly, cracking jokes and making fun. I speak of higher matters only to a very few, who I think will take my words and act upon them. But even they don't follow the instructions fully and completely. When he spoke, he didn't mince words. Besides giving general and individual religious instructions to earnest seekers of truth, he gave Diksha, spiritual initiation, to a select few. But in the matter of giving initiation and accepting one as a true disciple, Swami Brahmananda was particularly strict and discriminating. He refused almost everyone when they approached him the first time. If he found someone deserving, he would give a preparatory instruction, spiritual instruction, after the aspirant's persistent prayer for 4 or 5 years. The final initiation would come in some cases after 7 to 10 years. After the aspirant's steadiness, earnestness had been fully tested, and his or her eagerness for truth roused to the extreme. But once accepted as a disciple, Maharaj would stand by that person for good until the disciple reached the very shores of immortal bliss. His attitude is best described in his own words. Swami Brahmananda said, "He is the best guru who, whether his physical body stands or falls."
It's your fault.
Yeah, it's not a good idea. So his response finally to everyone was, "I'm not getting the signal from Maharaj. I'm not getting his assent. Can't do it." So even after his death, Maharaj was guiding his disciples. Swami Brahmananda loved his disciples not in spite of their faults, but with them more deeply. Watched them inwardly, blessed them all the more. Sometimes he would send for them and call them to his side not to warn or chastise, but to wean them from the evil course, making them feel the holy attraction of his personality and infusing into them sufficient spiritual strength to fight their bad samskars. Now, this is what the author here is saying. There's plenty of evidence that Swami Brahmananda had a wide range of methods for teaching his disciples. One incident, again from Swami Nirvanananda, who was his personal attendant. Nirvanananda. Nirvananandaji. Suji Maharaj. So, when you're in constant contact with someone of this spiritual stature, sooner or later you're going to do something that annoys them. And you might even do something that makes them flaming mad. So this happened. I don't know what it was exactly that happened, what the precipitating incident was. And sometimes they do this just to remove some scars from the disciple, just wipe them off. So Swami Brahmananda got very mad at Swami Nirvanananda, and Swami Pramananda heard what was going on, came over and went to the young monk who was not a Swami yet, and says, run away, because he was afraid what might happen to this young monk if Maharaj really got mad and expressed it. And Swami Nirvanananda said, running away from hearth and home, I came here. I have no place to run. See, this is the quality of his disciples. I have no place to run. So he hunkered down in the corner and wrote it out. You see? But there was this wide range that Swami Brahmananda had. So, okay, we'll get back to this article later, but I want to fill in with a few examples. Swami Brahmananda was became the president of the Ramakrishna order, which is the spiritual leader. And there were a lot of novices that had joined, and although he wasn't the guru of all of them, and many monks were monks for many years before they actually got spiritual initiation, before they got diksha. Sometimes they'd take vows before they got diksha. It was a different time. But he was responsible for the spiritual welfare of all of these novices. And in that sense, he was their spiritual teacher. So what was his manner of handling the young monks? Swami Brahmananda was looked upon as a spiritual dynamo by his brother disciples, by those swamis who were direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, by the other 15 direct disciples of Ramakrishna. Sometimes there were difficulties in the monastery. Young people had joined, and the human mind is so constituted that it has both bright and dark forces, good and bad samskaras. Sometimes the novices even quarreled and became obstinate and would talk back to their seniors or not follow instruction. And yet they had spiritual hankering. Swami Pramananda was avid of the Belar Math. And one day, 2 of these novices quarreled, and evidently they'd been giving him a hard time. This was just another incident. And Swami Pramananda got fired up. He came to Swami Brahmananda and said, "This is what's happening. If they continue like this, they should be expelled from the order." Brother Baburam Bhai, we should be patient with these boys. They received God's grace. Otherwise, how could their minds turn from the transitory values to the eternal truth? They have received God's grace. We must be patient with them. Swami Pramananda, when he got excited, he talked fast. It's all right, Maharaj, I'm bringing them. Swami Pramananda brought the 2 novices and whoever else he could round up, single file to Maharaj, and said, "Maharaj, just bless them and put your hand on their heads." So one by one, they received the blessings of Swami Brahmananda, and they felt at once some spiritual exaltation. Their minds were raised up to a higher level, and they could not, in that state, stoop to petty quarreling anymore. You see, there's psychological methods that are within the realm of the mind, but these spiritual methods are beyond the mind. Our ordinary problems, the existential limitations that we face, the existential problems that we face as human beings, birth, growth, decay, death, sorrow. The solution to these problems does not lie at the level at which they present themselves to us. The solution lies at a higher level. They aren't solved, but they're resolved at a higher level. So Swami Brahmananda, by putting his right hand on their heads and blessing them, raised their minds, at least temporarily, up to that level. And at that level, petty things seem petty. They're not worth the energy anymore. And you don't argue. You don't quarrel. So his brother disciples knew this about him. This wasn't an isolated incident. There was another problem that occurred in Varanasi, and Swami Brahmananda had to make a special trip. But it was the same thing. He just raised everyone's minds up. They knew he was a spiritual dynamo. He was the right person to lead the order, and sometimes they had to lean on him to get the problem solved. And my own kind of slightly devious mind thinking about this, and you think more deeply about these things, we're going to have to present them to other people. You know, I just kind of wonder if Swami Pramananda might have set this up by mentioning expulsion, knowing that the thought of expelling these young men from the order would arouse Swami Brahmananda's compassion, and in this mood of compassion, he could bless them. So, because he wasn't always in this mood. This mood would come and go. And you had to get in line. Even Swami Brahmananda, who became the first president of the order after the direct disciples, Swami Pramananda got him in line and had him get the blessings. So what was it like from the other side? What was it like from the perspective of the young monks that were receiving this training from Swami Brahmananda? And for this, I'd like to go to the reminiscences of Swami Gyanatmananda.
Which one?
Gyanatmananda, who met Swami Brahmananda in 1918. He says, "What was it that we found in Maharaj? A man of this earth, yet not of this earth, completely absorbed in meditation wherever he might be. When he was seated, his abstracted look told us his mind was on a different plane. He used to smoke frequently. His hubble bubble was always kept ready for him by his attendants when he sat in his chair. But would he smoke? A puff now, and another puff in a few minutes, and then the tobacco would burn itself out. Another preparation of tobacco was made, and that too met the same fate. His mind, attached to the tobacco for a few minutes, was soaring in another realm." And you know, there's a picture of Swami Brahmananda at the hookah. He wasn't smoking, but his lips were right there, you know, might have been between puffs. And there's a great deal to be said about the quality of photographs. When I was with Swami Chaitananda in Providence, at our Providence Center in 1987, Swami Sarvagadananda let us see their archives. And they had what must have been an original print of this photograph of Swami Brahmananda smoking a hookah. And just what's narrated here, you could see it. Looking at his eyes, he was gone. I mean, he was not seeing outside, he was seeing internally, even though his eyes were open. And, you know, it was, when I saw it, it was like, you know, Ramakrishna talks about the eyes of a bird who's sitting on the nest and warming her eggs. It's like they're gone. And so this is even, I mean, it was apparent to the monks in his training, but it's even apparent in a good photograph. Swami Gyanatmananda continues. When Swami Brahmananda walked, his feet, as it were, touched not the earth, but glided over the ground. When he spoke, and he seldom did that, it seemed that his words were coming from another sphere. It was sweetness all over, and blessings to all who chanced to be nearby. Now, this is important, because when he spoke fire, very directly. You read the spiritual teachings of Swami Brahmananda, or A Guide to Spiritual Life, or those books in their original Bengali, and he spoke uncompromising fire. You know, you feel like, but we can't hear his voice when he said those words. We can't hear the love in his voice. We can't hear the gentleness. We can't hear the solicitude in his voice. We miss that in the written word. So although he was speaking fire, he was also giving the people that he felt were ready for these teachings. He also gave them such love that they could raise up above themselves and understand and assimilate them without the kind of resistance that normally comes when you're spoken words like that are so uncompromising. So he narrates, during Swami Brahmananda's visits to Bellarmont, he used to get up very early, come to the eastern veranda of the upper story of the old monastery facing the Ganges, and take his seat in an armchair. We novices arrived a little earlier, took our seats on the floor, and tried to meditate before him, sitting in 2 rows. Maharaj generally remained absorbed in meditation, but sometimes he walked between our rows, repeating silently the name of God, and thereby giving impetus and strength to our childish attempts at meditation. When the sun rose and the bell for work rang, we generally got up, saluting his noble feet, went to our respective duties. When the Maharaj turned his benign eyes on any one of us in particular, as one of my fellow brothers has described, that fortunate one was sure to feel a divine joy that would last at least a day. If any of us were lucky enough to have a touch from him, that person was certain to have that joy last at least 3 days. And I also had the good fortune to feel his touch. At that time, Maharaj sometimes used to have fun with us, and what divine fun it was. We all enjoyed it to our heart's content, and went to our allotted duties with our hearts full of unspeakable joy and bliss. So, in this respect, Swami Brahmananda was like his master, Thakur, who was childlike, not childish, childlike, and would engage in this frivolity with his students, who later became these big monks in our order, the direct disciples. And they would say that, in that innocent, kind of joyful atmosphere of just being informal, in the master's presence informally, while he was just playing around with this, we got such joy that we can't even replicate by the hardest spiritual disciplines. So Maharaj was doing the same thing for these young men, who also became exemplary monks. So, now, it mentions in that article that people would sometimes have to wait as long as 10 years for Diksha, maybe sometimes 12 for spiritual initiation. So I want to narrate one of those cases for you. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is another one. I got this from a 1968 talk by Swami Satprakashananda that he gave in St. Louis on the Sunday closest to Swami Brahmananda's birthday that year. And Swami Satprakashananda was Maharaj's disciple, so this is from his own experience. This is on Swami Brahmananda's method of teaching. An ordinary teacher gives instruction to the ear. An extraordinary teacher gives instruction to the heart. That is, he awakens the heart. He opens the heart. And by this is meant the spiritual heart, not the physical, spiritual heart. His instruction serves as an eye-opener. A complete change on the outlook of life takes place. This has been evidenced by many of us who had the blessed privilege of sitting at his feet and receiving spiritual instructions. He didn't teach like an ordinary teacher, giving constant instructions and binding the student with rules and regulations. He was an awakener of souls. He would not speak too much, and he would not take up a scripture and explain it verse after verse. That type of instruction was done by junior swamis. And then, as a way of introducing the topic, Swami Satprakashananda narrated an incident that he heard from one of Swami Vivekananda's disciples, Swami Atmananda. This is in our literature. It's in Swami Vivekananda's biography in 2 volumes. But this is, and I don't know if it mentions Swami Atmananda by name, but this was told by Swami Atmananda to Swami Satprakashananda. They were both stationed in Dhaka, and they were friends, although Atmananda was a little older. At Bellarmont, Swami Vivekananda asked Swami Atmananda to bring a Bhagavad-Gita and read from it, starting at the 2nd chapter. He got to the 2nd chapter, the 3rd verse. In other words, he read 3 verses. And the 3rd verse is Sri Krishna. This was Vivekananda's favorite verse in the Bhagavad-Gita. Is give up this base faint-heartedness, O great hero. Give up this faint-heartedness and stand up like a hero and fight. He read that verse, and Swami Vivekananda said to him, "Your Gita study is over." What happened? Swami Satprakashananda narrated. Swami Atmananda was a highly advanced Swami. He was extremely learned and spiritually gifted. Even Swami Brahmananda respected him for that. What happened? An insight was developed in the presence of Swami Vivekananda all of a sudden when this verse was read. And Swami Vivekananda, realizing that that had happened, said, "Your Gita study's over," because that's just what happened. He just stated what had happened. He had a spiritual perception of the basic truths that are indicated in the Gita. So, scripture is the closest that we can get with words to the truth. But it's not the truth. The truth is more subtle. So, unless we have a very subtle spiritual perception, we can't in the true sense understand those subtle spiritual truths. We can be familiar with the commentaries, we can be familiar with the verses, we can memorize the Gita from start to finish, and still not grasp the fundamental truths that underlie them and that are attempting to be conveyed through those words. So what happened is that insight that he got in the presence of his teacher, Swami Vivekananda, served as a key to understanding the entire Bhagavad-Gita. In other words, in the presence of his teacher, this extremely qualified spiritual aspirant, his understanding jumped up to the next level or the level after that, and all of a sudden this spiritual realm opened up to him. And Swami Vivekananda said, "Your Gita study is over." Swami Satprakashananda continued. Now this is the important part. I recall one incident after I had come to Maharaj. He gave me some preliminary instruction, and I felt very much benefited at once, as if I had developed a new vision. Many things that I had never understood before became quite clear to me. Swami Brahmananda told me, "You will have a new life." Mentally, I said, "I already have a new life." And actually, I had tried to study the Bhagavad-Gita and the Upanishads from a very early age. And from 1907, he studied with Orthodox Sanskrit pundits who didn't even know English, the very rigorous study. And he continues. One day I was trying to meditate several months after Swami Brahmananda told me, you will have a new life. And all of a sudden, one verse of the Gita occurred to me. Of the unreal there is no existence, and of the real there is no non-existence. This is the 16th verse of chapter 2. The underlying truth flashed before my mind all of a sudden and that explained many other verses. I at once grasped the truth. I at once grasped it. That was his way of teaching. There's a similar verse in the Mandukya Upanishad. Where is that? Oh, here. I'm used to a podium where I can lay my picture, all these things out. So, the verse from the Mandukya Upanishad Karika, actually. Gaudapada says, that which is non-existent in the beginning and in the end is non-existent in the present manifest state as well. Such things are apparent like illusions, and still they are considered to be real. So, what he's saying is that the reality that we ordinarily experience through the senses and mind is this nama-rupa, or all these little tiny changing things, okay? And that's considered to be real, even though the things are changing and temporary and they come into being and they cease to exist, whereas the unchanging reality is not recognized as reality. So what opened up is the relationship between Maya and the underlying spiritual reality, which is really the key to understanding everything related to spiritual life. And this is Swami Brahmananda's method of teaching those of his students to whom he gave direct spiritual instruction and initiation. Suddenly, this spiritual realm opens up and the disciple feels and knows that it is through Maharaja's grace. Now, what about the people who came to Swami Brahmananda, with whom he whiled away his time in aimless talk and cracking jokes and making fun? What about them? And for this, I'll go to the reminiscences of Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda was, again, Swami Brahmananda's disciple. He started our center in Argentina in the 1930s. And I don't think anyone will argue that our center in Argentina was the hardest center to start in the Western Hemisphere. It was tough. And this was one tough Swami. He was the son of a Maharaj himself before he renounced the world. So, and he had a Western outlook, and he mentions this in his narration. You know, he wanted evidence, and he had this kind of scientific outlook, and it was uncommon. And anyway, we'll get into it. I'll just read his reminiscences. He's very eloquent. And this took place at Bellarmont when Swami Vivekananda was a novice. During the afternoons, outside people would come. They were from all social strata: farmers, scientists, doctors, lawyers, writers, novelists, artists, university students, employees, servants. All kinds of people, without distinction, would gather around Maharaj, and the conversations between the Swami and these people conducted in a climate of great joy. The subjects varied according to the life, occupation, and vocation of the speakers. For example, one day the Swami asked the great scientist, Jagdish Chandra Bose, "Sir, how long will you continue to observe the different manifestations of life in the vegetable kingdom?" As it means in the plant kingdom. "Don't you see, minerals are waiting for you. They want to show to the world through you that they also have the same divine consciousness. Everything is a manifestation of that living divinity." The professor was very pleased with this extraordinary recognition of his work and said humbly, "If you bless me, someday I shall be able to do it." To a famous dancer, he said, "What a wonderful dance you showed me, interpreting the young Sri Krishna. But, if you allow me, I would suggest something." You see the gentleness here, "if you allow me." He's giving him a very fundamental, life-changing teaching, but he introduces it this way. "But, if you allow me, I would suggest something. While dancing, as well as any other of his acts, Sri Krishna never forgot that he was a divine incarnation. He was avatar. So, when you represent Krishna through dance, do not forget this." The dancer answered, "Maharaj, this is impossible. How will I be able to raise myself to that divine height?" Maharaj told him, "Before beginning your dance, meditate for a while on Sri Krishna, and you will see. Sri Krishna himself will take possession of your body, and your dance will become different." See, it's a very simple instruction, but it's given also with that benign intention, with that grace. And the talk would go on. Maharaj told a lady, "Mother of so-and-so, what a delicious dish you prepared last week. But if you add this spice," and Maharaj mentioned the spice, "and then offer it to the deity in your home shrine, you will see how much happiness you will find in your heart. You have always cooked for your family. From now on, cook for God and your sons. By eating that sanctified food, will also feel the benefit." From my place on the big veranda, I would observe these extraordinary meetings and would notice that everyone felt great joy. When the meeting was finished and all were going down the stairs, they would say, "Maharaj loves me more than anybody else." I would think, these people are crazy. I told you, he had a Western attitude. These people are crazy. Since Maharaj is a human being, he must have more liking for somebody. How can it be that everyone is his dearest? Besides, I would think in my egoistic and wrong approach to spirituality, what kind of meeting is this? There was no advice on prayer or detachment, no advice on how to meditate. Maharaj didn't tell any person that he or she should practice austerity or do any spiritual practice whatsoever. And here, all say he is an ocean of spiritual understanding. I do not understand anything. One day, about 2 p.m., I was called to his room. Aha. He's called on the carpet. And there, for the first time, I learned about one aspect of true spirituality. Maharaj had already given me a nickname which he would use when we were alone. It was a Western nickname. Smiling, and somewhat jokingly, he said, "My son, I also observe you when you are observing me."
Look at him.
Do you know something? People don't know what true spirituality is. In this world, most do not know what pure love is. And they don't know how to love. Nevertheless, all expect to be loved by others. Let me read that. It's very significant. In this world, most don't know what pure love is. They don't know how to love. Nevertheless, everyone expects to be loved by others. They come to me expecting I will solve their problem. I tell them that they should tell everything to God, and He will remove their pain. All suffer, but each of them has something good. Maybe they don't even know what that extremely good quality is that they have. I encourage them to develop this good aspect. See, but Maharaj could see, like Sri Ramakrishna could see our samskars. He knew what was good, he knew how to bring out what was good. He says, I encourage them to develop this good aspect that they have, that they might not know they have. And so they get faith in themselves. By developing this good quality, they get shraddha. See this? So he's helping them develop shraddha. So that they get faith in themselves. They feel my love, and their hearts melt. And so they continue to love me and get ready for the spiritual life by nourishing that shraddha, that faith in themselves, and nourishing their love for me. Later on, when by God's mercy, a desire for purification and for pure permanent happiness wells up from inside, they come to me, and I tell them, you do this. Then, in a clean and well-cultivated soil, the seed of spirituality will germinate and grow and reach fruition. But, my son, if from the very beginning I would have started giving them spiritual advice, in general they would say, what is new in this? All that Swami is telling us, we already know. It's written in the books. So he wasn't just being frivolous. He wasn't just being frivolous. He was never just being frivolous. There was always this teacher that was present. You never knew when it was going to break to the surface, but it was always there. And then he goes from this kind of lesson about, I observe you observing me, and here's what's going on, and kind of this kind of overview of how Swami Brahmananda taught people in a very casual way that had not yet become serious spiritual seekers, but Swami Brahmananda could see they would. And then he has a lesson for this young novice in particular. Besides, I shall tell you a secret. This world is made up of good things and bad things. They vary only in degree. Covered by egoistic ideas, people don't feel the presence of real love. When this egoism increases too much, the great seekers of pure love, pure and love are capitalized, the great seekers of pure love pray to the divine to descend and save suffering humanity. Hearing the prayers of those great seekers of pure love, that is God, incarnates. This is the secret of divine incarnation. People have everything, but lost in ignorance, vanity, and egoism, they forget the necessity of feeling the presence of God. Pure love is the remedy for all ailments. With sincere and pure love, you can help others. Only love without egoism cleans all mortal impurities. Do you understand, my son? Try to practice it. On that day, I did not understand the depth of this teaching, but I felt myself renewed, full of strength. It appeared to me that I had received my true spiritual baptism. So, now, I've got to stop here. I'm not done with the lecture, but I've talked for over an hour. What I have left, let me tell you what I have left. It's about, I don't know, I think 15 minutes. And I'll read, and it's interesting. This 1930 series of articles in the Pramananda, that was the first attempt to record Swami Brahmananda's life, were written by the assistant editor, who at that time was Swami Satprakashananda, and Swami Ashokananda was the editor. And he talks about, more in detail, about this process of diksha, spiritual initiation. And then I give two examples. One is Swami Satprakashananda's own example, which is the example on the long side. It took 10 years. And the other one is a very different example. A young woman who received his grace very quickly. So if you have the patience, and if the kids aren't going to tear the house down, we can go on, and then we can open it up to questions. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Swamiji, it's Prakashananda also had to wait 10 years to get it.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Yes. In giving Diksha, Maharaj took into consideration only the aspirant's spiritual consciousness, his or her yearning for the highest good, and never thought of position, rank, learning, or sex. While men of worldly greatness without spiritual hankering were summarily dismissed, he most willingly initiated the meanest of the mean, if he saw in that person any real spiritual thirst. He initiated his disciples according to individual character. Every person has to grow spiritually and realize the truth in his or her own way, as determined by their samskaras. Swami Brahmananda could divine the spiritual inclinations and possibilities of the person he was going to initiate, and prescribe for that person the best course that was suitable. Before he gave initiation, he would find out by meditation the chosen deity, the Ishta, and the mantra for the disciple, that is, the mode of practice and the ideal appropriate for their spiritual nature. Thus, he guided each of his disciples in his or her particular line of spiritual development. This is a task only for gurus of exceptional spiritual power. An ordinary guru leads his disciples along the path by which he himself received illumination. But this doesn't suit one and all. So Brahmananda, because he was so multifaceted, as was his guru, could understand the particular inclination of each person's mind and their level of development, and prescribe the course of spiritual practice which would most efficiently and quickly lead them to God. Swami Brahmananda said, regarding spiritual practices, the same rule will not be applicable to everyone. We must know the tendencies of each individual before instruction can be given. It is essential that the guru should study closely the individual tendencies and peculiarities and give instruction in such a form as will readily appeal to their temperaments. I have seen in the case of the master how he would take each individual aside and give instruction privately. I mentioned Swami Brahmananda earlier, and he speaks about this process of asking for initiation from Maharaj. He says, despite our earnest requests, Maharaj refused initiation to most of us. When we approached him for initiation, he said, clear your minds first, then you will be granted diksha. What good would it be for me to sow seeds in a jungle? Clear your minds. Then you will be able to reap the fruit of initiation. He didn't mince words. But again, it was given with, all this was given with great love. So I want to give the example of Swami Satprakashananda's journey. He first met Swami Brahmananda on the Saraswati Puja Day in February of 1908, and he received initiation in December of 1917 on Winter Solstice Day, so almost 10 years. And this is for someone who was intimately associated with the work in Dhaka. He was giving classes and living at the ashram and kind of conducting the work there before it was officially an ashram. He saw him for the second time at Bellarmont. His third visit was when Maharaj came with a very large party, including Swami Pramananda, to Dhaka. And at this point, his first request from Maharaj, he asked him, he said, I want to become a monk, please allow me. Swami Brahmananda said, no, you can't become a monk. He said, you're the only child of your widowed mother, and you have to serve her until she dies. Then you can join. In the meantime, he just gave him two instructions. Satyam Brahmacharya. Truthfulness and continence. That's all. Then he, after asking to become a monk and being refused, and he wasn't able to join. This was 1916. He wasn't able to join until after Maharaj's death. He joined in 1923, after his mom passed away. So first he asked to become a monk, and Maharaj says, no, you have to serve your mother until she dies, then you can become a monk. And then he asked for spiritual instruction. And Maharaj responded by saying, continue doing as you have been doing. Now what does that mean? From his early youth, Swami Satprakashananda had been practicing meditation every day, twice a day. No one told him to, no one gave instructions, he just did it, and he didn't know whether he was doing right or wrong. Now this is someone who has very good samskaras from their previous life. And Swami Brahmananda didn't, he'd never been told about it. It's something that this young man never talked about. So he said, continue doing as you have been doing. So he's saying two things. I know what you've been doing. It's, your life is an open book to me. And you're okay, his fourth visit, again, he asked for this is the first time he asked for spiritual initiation. He wanted initiation at the earliest opportunity. Now, this was not a good idea. He was anxious, he was importunate with Maharaj. And he said he put him off. He put him off. And Swami Saprakashananda, his name was Harish, was impatient. And Swami Vireshwarananda and Swami Girijananda, I don't know if they were monks yet, this was 1916, they were going to Jairambati, to Mother's place, to receive Diksha from Holy Mother. And Swami Saprakashananda joined them with the intention of getting Diksha from Holy Mother. And on the way to Jairambati, as ill luck would have it, he came down with a very bad case of dysentery. And they stopped and they looked after him for a while. And then Vireshwarananda, who was a friend, talked to him and he said, no, he says, this won't do to go to Mother. It's not a good idea. It will cause her too much trouble. It'll be too much trouble for her. And you should go back. So he agreed. He went back. The dysentery went away, right away, okay? Right away, it went away. It's like nothing happened. But the next time he saw Maharaj, he went in trepidation because these things travel. So he went in trepidation to Maharaj, expecting a scolding. And all this time, from 1908 to Maharaj's death in 1922, he never scolded Swami Saprakashananda, not once. The only thing he said was, there are many obstacles on the path. Be patient. So, it became clear that this young man, Harish, was meant for Swami Brahmananda and not someone else. So sometime shortly after this, Swami Saprakashananda was walking with Swami Shivananda on the bank of the Ganges. And walking with means walking with in a very respectful way, slightly behind him. And he asked him, some people get Diksha, initiation, from Holy Mother. Some people get initiation from Swami Brahmananda, from Maharaj. Is there any difference? Swami Shivananda says, no, there's no difference at all. It's like the same water coming from two different taps. There's no difference at all. And this relieved him because he was thinking maybe you get something better from Holy Mother. This relieved him. He says, there's no difference at all. The same water coming from two different taps. But then he says, why do you say get? It is given. It is given. Yeah, it is given. It's grace. You don't get it. You receive it. So this was very helpful. He realized that he had to wait and pray and hope that he would receive this great grace from Maharaj. So he became, his description that I read earlier of, waiting and putting people off and making them just about ready to burst in their desire to finally get Diksha. That was his case. And he received it, as I said, and this was about a 2-month visit in 1917, towards the end of 1917. And it was in Calcutta. Swami Saprakashananda, of course, was from Dhaka. So in an early part of this visit, in November, at Udbodha, Swami Brahmananda was there, Swami Saprakashananda, Harish came to see him, and Swami Dhirananda, what was his name? I've forgotten. Anyway, I forgot his Maharaj name. Swami Dhirananda was there. He was a senior Swami, all the direct disciples loved him. And Swami Saprakashananda, again, knew him from Dhaka because he'd served there. So Swami Dhirananda thought, he's going to help this young lad out. And as he was coming in, he says, Maharaj, this boy has some questions. And as it happened, he didn't have any questions. Swami Saprakashananda didn't have any questions. He just came to be near Maharaj. And Swami Brahmananda's reply indicates he knew this. He said, you've seen a holy man, you've made pranams, you've bowed down. What more question can there be? So, and I heard this many times from Swami Saprakashananda when he talked about Maharaj. You've seen a holy man, you've made pranams. What more question can there be? And I thought, why is this so important? Why does he keep saying this? Why is this so significant? I didn't get it until years, maybe a couple decades after Swami died. And suddenly it occurred to me why it's so meaningful. You've seen a holy man. That doesn't mean here. It means here. You recognize the person through whom the problem of your life will be solved. You've seen a holy man. You've bowed down at his feet. Again, it's not talking about the physical act. What is it? What did the pranam signify? Self-surrender. Swami Saprakashananda used to say, he discouraged people. He didn't like them making pranams. He said, you only have to bow down once. You've made pranams to the Lord. It means you've recognized the person through whom the problem of your life will be solved. You've integrated your mind to the point where you can surrender to that path as your life's goal. What more question can there be? The only thing left is to walk the path. You see? And this is exactly the place where this young man was at this time. He received his Diksha the next month. So Maharaj was just describing the state of their relationship as it exists, as he understood it, and as his disciple understood it. And he was telling him, don't worry, it's coming. So I want to close with a very different type of Diksha. And this is narrated by Swami Nirvanananda. It was in the year 1918. Maharaj was then staying at Balaram Boshe's house in the Bagbazar section of Calcutta. I was with him as his attendant. On this particular day, Maharaj had just finished his lunch. Generally, he took rest at this time. I was sitting on a bench outside his room when a young girl and her brother arrived. The girl asked for permission to see Maharaj. I told her, it will not be convenient to see him now. She began to cry. Swami Saradananda had told her to come. As she was crying, she pleadingly asked, look, I shall only bow down before Maharaj, and then go. Please, arrange it. Moved by her tears, I again went to Maharaj. Sarat Maharaj has sent this girl. She only wants to bow down and leave. Hearing Swami Saradananda's name, Maharaj said, bring her. I later learned that while prostrating, the girl began to sob. Maharaj suddenly went into an ecstatic mood and became silent, motionless. After some time, he looked at the girl and said, get up, my child. Tell me, what has happened? But the girl could not stop weeping. She stood up, but was not able to speak for some time. Still not able to speak, she pointed to a picture of Sri Ramakrishna, which Maharaj had in his room, and said, he asked me to come to you.
Yes. Yeah.
She calmed down enough to tell her story. She was married at the age of 14. Only 2 weeks after their marriage, her husband died, which was a disastrous situation at that time, for a Hindu widow could not remarry or work to support herself, but had to depend on her parents or near relatives to care for her. Her future looked extremely dark, and in her despair, she wept bitterly and incessantly prayed, "O Lord, what will become of me? I am so lonely and helpless. What shall I do? Please show me the way." After a year or so, one night, Sri Ramakrishna appeared to her in a dream and said, "Do not weep. My son, Rakal, is living in Baghbazar. Go to him. He will help you." The girl did not know anything about Sri Ramakrishna or Rakal, and she wondered, how can I get to Baghbazar, which is in another section of the city, far from where she lived? She did not say anything about her dream to anyone in her father-in-law's household, but went to her mother and told everything. Her mother knew about Sri Ramakrishna. On learning about the master from her mother, the girl and her brother went to Baghbazar seeking a holy man. She asked if a holy man lived nearby and was told that several holy men were living in the Udbodhan publication house. Swami Saradananda was staying there, and she told him about her vision, and the Swami sent her to Balaram Mandir to see Maharaj. She was with Maharaj for more than 2 hours. Finally, he called me in. As I entered the room, I noticed she had received initiation. Maharaj asked me to get some food, some prasad for her and for her brother. After this meeting, the girl came often to see Maharaj, and I saw her once or twice at the Bellar Monastery after Maharaj's passing of 1922. So this is quite a different initiation. You know, he made Swami Satprakashananda squirm for 10 years. And she had 1 year of intense austerity and despair, and the master appeared to her and brought her to his son. So there was this range. It wasn't that Maharaj, it was just situational. He did as the situation required or demanded or needed. And he had the insight to know what to do. So I want to finish this. Swami Brahmananda continued. In 1942, a nun in ochre-colored robes came to see me at the Bellarmont. She was accompanied by a young girl disciple. I did not recognize the nun, but she reminded me of her, excuse me, of her visit with Maharaj at Balaram Boshe's house 24 years before. I at once recalled the incident and asked her where she had been all these years. She said that following Maharaj's instructions, she spent her time in spiritual practice in such places as Varanasi, Vrindavan, and Haridwar. Now she was living in Calcutta near Kalighat with a few girl disciples. Her appearance showed definite spiritual attainment. About 3 years later, the same girl disciple who had accompanied the nun came to Bellarmont alone. When I asked about her teacher, I was told she had passed 2 years previous. During her last day, she was ill. One morning, she asked for an almanac to find the nearest auspicious day. On that day, she asked her disciples to devote their time to prayer and meditation. She herself repeated the names of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Maharaj, and while doing so in full consciousness, left her body.
Swamiji, it's wonderful that you're doing this. We are reading Eternal Companion. This is what the story is in that book, Eternal Companion.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to read more about it, read that book. We are studying that right now. And so no question, because we have seen a holy man, we bowed out the holy man. No more questions.
Great.
Not for me, is it? Yeah. So let's do the closing prayer, maybe.
Okay. You want me to do a closing prayer?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This ever-changing, interdependent world of things and beings is infinite. That self-existent, unchanging spiritual reality is infinite. This ever-changing universe, having come from that unchanging spiritual reality, that spiritual reality remains unchanged, complete, perfect, infinite. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swamiji. It was really wonderful.
Thank you,
Very good.
Shamaji. It was a
Very,
long
very good.
lecture.
Yeah.
So much research.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the